as we think about Holy Week that began with the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. Maundy Thursday, when Jesus and the disciples celebrated the Passover together. Good Friday, that paradox of his death being good for us. Black Saturday, when hope was gone, when despair and fear reigned, to Resurrection Sunday. Sometimes Holy Week is called Passion Week. Passion is an interesting word. It means a number of things. One of the meanings of passion is suffering. So the Passion Week was Jesus' week of suffering. Highs and lows, tears of blood, tears and blood that was like sweat, betrayal, beating, disappointment, to suffer. But the suffering was the prelude to the celebrating. The suffering was a prerequisite for the resurrection. And what took place that week was the most predicted series of events in history. It was predicted, sometimes the word we use is prophesied, by more people in more different ways over a longer period of time than anything ever. And we get all excited about some hints in Nostradamus writings or predictions about the end of the world by the Mayans. But no event, no series of events had ever been predicted like what took place during the life of Jesus, and particularly that last week, the suffering servant. Hints and suggestions and object lessons and prophecies regarding the place of his birth, the extraordinary circumstances of his conception, his escape to Egypt and return to Nazareth, and the circumstances surrounding his death. The writer of Hebrews put it this way: in the past, God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways, but in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through him he made the universe. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. So all of those prophecies and all of those symbolic representations from the altar and the sacrifices and the priesthood, it was all about Jesus. It was all fulfilled in Jesus. So Jesus and the crucifixion and the resurrection are about promises made and promises kept, about prophecies made and prophecies fulfilled. The most predicted and the most prophesied life in history. Let me just remind you of a couple of those. First of all, from Isaiah chapter 53. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with sufferings. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows. Yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him, and afflicted. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. Written about 600 years before Jesus was born. Zechariah chapter 9. See how familiar this is. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and having salvation, gentle and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. And then one more. Jewish children were raised memorizing virtually all of the Old Testament. And this would have been something that they had memorized. Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer, by night, and I am not silent. Yet you are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the praise of Israel. In you our fathers put their trust. They trusted and you delivered them. They cried to you and were saved. In you they trusted and were not disappointed. But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by men and despised by people. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. Yet you brought me out of the womb. You made me trust in you, even at my mother's breast. From birth I was cast upon you. From my mother's womb you have been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there was no one to help. Many bulls surround me, strong bulls of Bashan encircle me, roaring lions tearing their prey, open their mouths wide against me. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax, it has melted away within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You lay me in the dust of death. Dogs have surrounded me. A band of evil men has encircled me. They have pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them, but cast lots for my clothing. Prophecies made, prophecies fulfilled, promises made, promises kept. Even Jesus predicted his own death and resurrection when he said that the temple is going to be destroyed and then be rebuilt again in 3 days. And that temple, he was talking about himself. For all the prophecies and predictions and promises, hints, suggestions, and symbols, the resurrection of Jesus was the most unexpected event in history. To the Romans, this annoyance, this thorn in their side was gone, to bother them no more. To the Jewish leaders, their attitude seemed to have been, if you kill the head, the body will die. Get rid of the leader, all the disciples will just go back to their jobs, go back to their families. The followers of Jesus did not expect it to happen. They were in hiding. They were afraid of the Jews coming after them. The enemy, Satan, didn't expect it to happen. He was gloating. He won, he thought. Even Jesus' mother and her friends, they took spices to the tomb to finish the burial. They didn't expect it to happen. In this passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul looks back and he describes and defines the events that took place as he wrote this letter to the Corinthian believers. But if it is preached that Christ has been raised from the dead, how can some of you say there is no resurrection of the dead? If there is no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. You see the logic here? And a way of paraphrasing that is, for those of us who live in an age where the supernatural is diminished and neglected and discounted, he's saying, if there is no supernatural, then Jesus wasn't raised from the dead. But if Jesus was raised from the dead, there is something beyond nature, beyond matter. There is supernatural. If there is no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless. And so is your faith. More than that, we are then found to be false witnesses about God. And a false witness is not somebody telling what they believe is true but may be mistaken. A false witness is someone who is telling an untruth intentionally about what happened. Intentional falsehood, similar to the witnesses who were called to testify against Jesus. False witnesses. Paul said, we're no better than them if the resurrection didn't happen. We're false witnesses about God. For we have testified about God that he raised Christ from the dead. But he did not raise him if in fact the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, then Christ has not been raised either. He's laying the groundwork for the resurrection. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. You are still in your sins. Then those also who have fallen asleep, that's an interesting phrase for believers. Believers, he said, have fallen asleep. What we call death, he says, is a temporary state because resurrection is coming. Then those also who have fallen asleep in Christ are lost. If only for this life we have hope in Christ, we are to be pitied more than all men. But Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. And in first fruits, Paul was referring to the feast of the first fruits, where at the beginning of the harvest, the priest would go out and cut a sheaf of wheat to thank God for the harvest and to thank him in anticipation of the harvest to come. And he said, Christ is the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. That you are going to follow him into resurrection, into new life, into eternity. For since death came through a man, Adam, the resurrection of the dead comes also through a man. For as in Adam all died, so in Christ all will be made alive. But each in his own turn, Christ the first fruits, then when he comes, those who belong to him. Then the end will come, when he hands over the kingdom to God the Father after he has destroyed all dominion, authority, and power. For he must reign until he has put all enemies under his feet. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. Sometimes it's ironic in our secular culture, we talk about death as if it should be a welcome thing. No. Death is our enemy. It is because of Jesus death is conquered by life. Let's sing another song, and then we'll have a brief devotional, and then